The first time I called Damian Moretti, I was sitting on the floor of my apartment with my back against a kitchen cabinet, my phone shaking so hard in my hand I could barely hit his name. Rain tapped against the fire escape outside like impatient fingers, and somewhere beyond my front door, Tyler was still there. Still pacing. Still muttering to himself in that low voice that used to sound charming and now made every muscle in my body lock tight. I should have called the police. That would have been the normal thing. The smart thing. The thing any decent person would tell a 24-year-old waitress with rent due in 4 days and a left arm throbbing so badly she could barely breathe. But Tyler knew where I worked. He knew my schedule. He knew my friends. And Damian Moretti was the only man I knew whose name could make other dangerous men think twice. "Can you come get me?" I whispered when he answered, because that was all I had left. There was silence on the line for one long second. Not confusion. Not hesitation. Just silence so controlled it made my heart beat even harder. Then his voice came through, low and even and terrifyingly calm. "Send me your address, Chloe. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." I don't remember typing my address. I remember dropping the phone onto my lap and staring at the chain lock on the door like it was the only thing holding my whole life together. My apartment smelled like cold coffee, cheap candles, and the takeout I'd been too tired to throw away the night before. A lamp lay crooked on its side near the couch. My purse was overturned by the entry table, lipstick and receipts scattered across the floor like evidence from someone else's bad decisions. Everything looked small, fragile, exposed. That was the worst part of nights like that. Not the fear itself, but how ordinary everything around it stayed. The refrigerator kept humming. Rain kept falling. A car alarm chirped somewhere down the block. And I sat there trying not to cry because crying made Tyler angry, even when he couldn't see it. 12 hours earlier, I'd been balancing a tray of martinis at Bella Rosa, smiling at people who wore watches that cost more than my car. Friday nights in downtown Chicago always felt like theater. Gold light, white tablecloths, women laughing too loudly, men talking over expensive bourbon like the world belonged to them. I knew how to move through it without being noticed. That had become my best skill. Keep your eyes down. Keep your tone sweet. Keep your sleeves pulled low enough that nobody asks questions. It had worked until Damian walked in. He didn't enter Bella Rosa like other men. He didn't need attention. Attention found him anyway. 6'2" maybe. Black wool coat over a charcoal suit that looked tailored down to the last stitch. Dark hair brushed back from a face that was almost too sharp to be handsome. The whole room changed when he crossed it. Conversations softened. Staff straightened. Even Marco, our floor manager who barked at everyone like he owned the building, lowered his voice when he said, "VIP section. Don't make mistakes." I'd heard Damian's name before, always in fragments, always quiet. A businessman. A donor, a man with connections, a man people did favors for and never talked about afterward. I told myself he was just another wealthy customer until I reached his table and felt his eyes settle on me like he already knew something was wrong. "Water?" I asked, proud that my voice sounded steady. He looked at my face first, then at my right hand holding the pitcher, then at my left sleeve where the fabric had ridden up half an inch. Just enough. Just enough for him to see the fading mark near my wrist I had covered with makeup 3 shades too warm. His expression didn't change. That was somehow worse. "Who did that to you?" he asked quietly. And just like that, the tray in my hand felt 10 pounds heavier. My fingers tightened around the pitcher hard enough that the metal handle pressed crescents into my skin. For one wild second, I thought about lying better. About laughing it off. About giving him the same excuse I gave everyone else who noticed too much and cared too little. Clumsy. Doorframe. Bad night. I had a whole collection of explanations polished smooth from overuse. But something in Damian Moretti's face made every easy lie feel childish. He was not looking at me with pity. He was not looking at me with curiosity either. He was looking at me like he was filing away facts, one by one, and once he had enough of them, something irreversible would happen. "It is nothing," I said anyway, because fear had taught me to protect the wrong people. His gaze dropped briefly to my wrist again, then lifted to my face. Nothing does not make you flinch when someone reaches for a water glass. I had not even realized he had noticed that. Heat climbed up my neck. Around us, Bella Rosa kept moving in its usual polished rhythm. Silverware clinked. A woman at the next table laughed at something too loudly. Marco hissed at a busser near the kitchen doors. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. But at Damien's table, the air felt still, as if the rest of the room had drifted a few inches farther away. I forced myself to pour the water without spilling. "Are you ready to order?" I asked, keeping my eyes on the crystal glasses instead of his face. One of the men with him started asking about the veal special, but Damien did not look at the menu. He looked at me. "What time do you get off work, Chloe?" My stomach dropped so fast it felt like missing a stair in the dark. I had never told him my name. Maybe Marco had. Maybe he had read it on my name tag. Maybe men like Damien did not need ordinary explanations for knowing things they should not know. "Midnight," I said before I could stop myself. Regret followed instantly. He gave a small nod, like he had expected that answer. "Take your break before then." I blinked. "Excuse me. You look exhausted." His voice stayed calm, almost indifferent, but there was something steady beneath it. And tired people make mistakes. I should have been insulted. Instead, I was unsettled by how close he had landed to the truth. I had slept maybe 4 hours in 2 days. Tyler had spent most of the week cycling between apology and accusation, sending messages, calling from blocked numbers, waiting outside my building in a car I recognized even when he parked half a block away. The stress sat under my skin like a fever. "I am fine," I said. Damien's mouth moved almost imperceptibly, not quite a smile. "No, you are functioning. That is not the same thing." Before I could answer, Marco appeared at my elbow with that brittle grin managers use when money is near. "Everything all right here?" he asked. Damien finally looked away from me. "Perfectly." Marco nodded too fast, then turned to me. "Chloe, terrace delivery. Table 14 wants another bottle." I grabbed the empty water pitcher like it was a lifeline and escaped toward the service station, my pulse pounding in my ears. Maria caught me by the coffee machine 2 minutes later. "What did he say to you?" she whispered. "You look pale." I reached for the wine opener with my good hand and kept my face turned down. "Nothing." She snorted softly. "Men like that do not do nothing." I wanted to tell her she was wrong. I wanted to believe Damien was just another wealthy man passing through another Friday night I needed to survive. Then the front doors opened again, letting in a gust of cold air and rain, and every thought in my head went still. Tyler stepped inside Bellarosa wearing the smile he used when he wanted the world to think he was harmless. The sight of Tyler standing under Bellarosa's chandelier light felt more wrong than seeing him outside my apartment ever had. He did not belong here with the polished marble floors, and the men in $1,000 suits, and the women who wore diamonds like they were born in them. But Tyler had always been good at stepping into places that were not his and acting like the rest of the room should adjust. He ran a hand through his hair, smiled at the hostess, and scanned the dining room until his eyes found me by the service station. My whole body went cold. Maria noticed first. "Do you know him?" she asked quietly. I could not answer. Tyler was already walking toward me with that same easy confidence that had fooled me 2 years ago when I still believed soft voices meant soft hearts. He stopped in front of me like this was a normal surprise visit, like men did not spend weeks ignoring boundaries and then call it love. "There you are," he said, warm and familiar and completely wrong. "I have been calling." I kept the tray clutched against my chest because I needed something solid between us. "You should not be here." His smile flickered for half a second, then returned smoother than before. "We need to talk." "No," I said. It came out too quiet, but it was. Still no. That should have mattered. Tyler leaned in just enough that anyone watching from across the room would think he was speaking gently to his girlfriend after an argument. That was his gift. He could dress pressure up as concern so neatly people thanked him for it. "You have been ignoring me, Chloe. That is not how this works." My throat tightened. Maria shifted beside me, sensing something off, but not enough to understand the whole shape of it. "Sir," she said carefully, "employees are not allowed visitors during service." Tyler gave her a glance, so polite it made my skin crawl. "This will only take a minute." Then his attention moved back to me, and I saw the warning beneath the charm. "Come outside." I shook my head. One small motion. It felt like stepping onto thin ice. Tyler's jaw tightened. "Do not make a scene." The irony would have made me laugh if I had not been so afraid. For months, I had been rearranging my life around his moods. Taking different streets home, muting my phone, parking under brighter lights, wearing long sleeves in July. And still he stood here saying I was the problem, I was the complication, I was the one making things difficult. "Chloe." My name came from behind him this time, low and precise. Tyler turned. So did I. Damien had not raised his voice, but somehow the space around us changed anyway. He was still seated in the VIP section, one hand resting near his untouched glass, his attention fixed entirely on Tyler now. There was nothing dramatic in his expression. No anger. No display. That made it worse. Men like Tyler depended on noise and confusion. Damien looked like silence sharpened into a weapon. You are interrupting my staff, he said. Tyler gave a short laugh, the kind men use when they are deciding whether another man is bluffing. Your staff. Damien stood then, slow and unhurried, adjusting the cuff of his dark jacket as if this were a minor inconvenience. Every instinct in me screamed that Tyler had just walked into a room where the rules were no longer his. She is on the clock, Damien said. And she already told you no. Tyler's smile thinned. This is between me and my girlfriend. Something cold moved through Damien's eyes at that word. He took a single step closer. Enough? To make Tyler angle his shoulders without seeming to realize he had done it. The lady answered you, Damien said. If you require clarification, I can provide it. The restaurant had gone quieter. Not silent, but close enough that I could hear the rain against the windows again. Tyler looked at me, expecting me to rescue him from the tension he had created, expecting me to soften the moment the way I always used to. Instead, for the first time in months, I stayed still. Damien reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, pulled out a plain ivory business card, and set it on the edge of my tray. His gaze never left Tyler. If she ever needs help, he said, she will call me. Tyler did not touch the card. He just stared at it on my tray as if it had insulted him personally. Then he looked at Damien again, really looked this time, and I watched the exact moment confidence turned into calculation. Men like Tyler were always brave when they thought they understood the room. He understood this one less with every second. I think there has been a misunderstanding, he said, smoothing his voice into something calm and reasonable. He used that tone on landlords, police officers, my coworkers, anyone he wanted to win over before they noticed the cracks. Chloe and I are together. We are just having a rough week. Damien's expression did not change. Then have your rough week somewhere else. It was such a simple sentence. No raised voice. No threat anyone could point to. But the air around us tightened anyway. Tyler gave a short laugh, too quick to be real. You do not know her. I know she told you no. Damien's words landed with quiet precision, each one colder than the last. That should have been enough. I felt something shift inside me then, small but unmistakable. Not safety exactly. I was not ready to trust safety, but recognition. A line had been drawn in front of me, and for once I had not been the one forced to defend it alone. Tyler turned toward me as if Damien were no longer worth acknowledging. That was another one of his habits. If he could not control the strongest person in the room, he would try to control the one he thought was easiest to break. Chloe, he said, dropping his voice into that private tone he used when he wanted to remind me how easily kindness could curdle into blame. Come outside for 5 minutes. That is all I am asking. His eyes flicked toward my tray, toward the business card, then back to me. You do not need strangers getting involved in our lives. Our lives. The words almost made me dizzy. There had not been an hour in months. There had only been damage control, excuses, locked bathroom doors, apologies with grocery store flowers. Text messages that swung from I miss you to you are ruining everything. I am working, I said. My voice trembled, but it held. Tyler heard it too. So did Damien. One man seemed pleased by my fear. The other seemed to notice it as information. Marco materialized near the host's stand then, sweat shining at his temples despite the cool air conditioning. He must have sensed money, power, disaster, or all three. Gentlemen, he said with an uneasy smile. Maybe we can keep things comfortable for everyone tonight. Damien glanced at him once. Then remove him. Marco froze. Tyler looked almost offended. I came here to see my girlfriend. And she declined, Damien said. Again, the room had not stopped moving, but it had started pretending not to notice us. A couple near the window suddenly found their dessert menu fascinating. One of the bartenders polished the same glass for a full minute. Maria stood by the espresso machine, openly worried now. Nobody wanted to interfere. Everybody wanted to know what happened next. Tyler straightened his jacket and smiled at me in a way that made my stomach turn over. You are embarrassing yourself, Chloe. That almost worked. Shame had always worked on me before. It had kept me quiet longer than fear ever did. But maybe exhaustion changes a person. Maybe enough sleepless nights scrape something raw and honest loose inside you. Or maybe I was just too tired to keep protecting a man who never protected me back. I looked Tyler in the eye and said, louder this time, "Leave." The word seemed to echo more than it should have. Tyler's face went blank. Not angry. Not yet. Blank in the way a window goes dark before a storm. He gave one slow nod, like he was granting me something gracious instead of losing. "Fine," he said. "We'll go." He stepped back once, then leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "But you do not get to hide behind rich men forever." I went still. Before I could move, before I could answer, Damien crossed the distance between them with the same unsettling calm he seemed to bring into every room. He did not touch Tyler. He did not need to. He just stood there, close enough that Tyler had to turn away from me to face him, and said in that low, measured voice, "She does not need forever. She needs tonight." Tyler held Damien's gaze for one stretched second that felt longer than the whole night before it. Then he smiled, but there was nothing warm in it now. Just calculation. Just the cold little click of a man realizing he had lost control of the room and deciding to pretend it had never mattered. "Tonight," he repeated softly, as if testing the word for weakness. Damien did not blink. "That is what I said." Tyler looked back at me, and that was somehow worse than if he had stayed focused on Damien. Because I knew that look. I knew how he filed things away. Humiliations. Boundaries. Witnesses. Debts. He never forgot anything that made him feel small. "You always do this," he said to me, voice low enough that it almost sounded intimate. "You make everything dramatic." I should have shrunk. I should have apologized. I should have done what I had done for months and tried to smooth over the rough edges of his temper before they cut deeper. But Bellarosa was too bright tonight. Too public. Too full of silver and crystal and strangers pretending not to listen. And for the first time in a very long time, Tyler was not the most dangerous person standing near me. "Leave," I said again. My voice did not shake this time. That surprised both of us. Tyler's jaw tightened for half a beat before he recovered. He slid his hands into his coat pockets and gave a little nod like he was gracious enough to let me win. "Fine." He stepped backward, then looked at Damien with a smile that belonged on a worse man and somehow fit Tyler perfectly. "Take care of her, then." Damien did not answer. He did not need to. Tyler turned and walked toward the front doors. With the same practiced calm he had entered with, but the spell had broken now. The hostess would not meet his eyes. One of the bartenders moved aside before Tyler got near him. Even Marco, who usually treated trouble like a bad Yelp review he could smile through, looked relieved when the doors finally shut behind him and a gust of cold rain-scented air disappeared with him. I stood there holding my tray like I had forgotten what it was for. My knees felt weak. My heart felt too loud. Maria crossed to me first. "Chloe," she whispered, touching my elbow lightly, carefully, like she was asking permission to care. "Are you okay?" I opened my mouth and almost said yes out of reflex. The word rose automatically, trained into me by years of making pain sound manageable. But it would not come out. So I nodded instead, and even that felt dishonest. Marco rushed over next, all polished nerves and managerial panic. "Everything is under control," he announced to nobody in particular, then lowered his voice. "Chloe, go to the back for 5 minutes. Fix yourself up. Fix yourself up." Like this was lipstick smeared on a collar. Like all I needed was powder and cold water and a few deep breaths. Still, I was grateful for the excuse to move. I turned toward the service hall, but not before my eyes flicked once to Damien. He had already returned to his table. That should have made the whole thing feel smaller, more normal. Instead, it unsettled me even more. He sat there with one hand near his untouched drink, speaking quietly to the man on his right, as if nothing remarkable had happened. But when I looked at him, he looked back immediately. Not like he had been watching me. Like he had simply never stopped. I lasted exactly 30 seconds in the employee restroom before my hands began to shake. The fluorescent lights were too harsh. The mirror too honest. I looked pale, tired, older than 24. My ponytail had slipped loose around my face. My mascara had smudged at the corners. I ran cold water over my wrists and tried to steady my breathing. Inhale for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. It was a trick my therapist had taught me 2 years ago, before I stopped going because Tyler said it was a waste. of money, and maybe because some part of me had started believing him. I was reaching for a paper towel when my phone buzzed in my apron pocket. One message. No name. Unknown number. I did not need a signature to know who it was from. You should have come outside. My stomach dropped so fast I had to grip the sink. A second message arrived before I could even think. He cannot stay with you every second, Chloe. Then a third. I know where you live. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, then sharpened again, then blurred one more time as if my mind could somehow refuse to understand what my body already knew. My apartment. He knew where I lived because of course he did. Tyler always knew what mattered to me before I did, and once he found the weak spot, he pressed on it until everything else cracked around it. The restroom suddenly felt too small, too bright, too easy to trap someone inside. I locked my phone and slipped it back into my apron, but the messages kept burning against my skin like they were still lit up there. Breathe in for 4. Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. I tried again, slower this time, pressing both hands flat against the sink until the cool porcelain grounded me. The problem with fear, real fear, was that it did not arrive like a scream. It arrived like math. Distance from work to apartment. Minutes left in my shift. Whether Tyler still sat outside in his car when I got off. Whether the deadbolt on my front door would matter if he had already decided it would not. Whether calling the police would help, or just hand him one more reason to say I had ruined his life. There was a soft knock on the restroom door. Chloe, Maria's voice. You in there? I swallowed hard, unlocked the door, and found her standing in the hallway with 2 espresso cups in one hand and concern written all over her face. You were gone a while. I tried to smile. It felt thin and badly assembled. I am fine. She looked at me for a second too long, the way women do when they know you are lying, but also know better than to push in a place with security cameras and coworkers 2 feet away. Marco says you can leave after the dessert rush, she said quietly. And for what it is worth, that man at table 12 has not stopped watching the hallway since you went back here. My pulse jumped. Damien. Maria nodded, then lowered her voice further. I do not know who he is, exactly, but when Mr. Romano comes in, even Marco suddenly remembers how to be polite. So if you need something, maybe tonight is the night to ask. I wanted to reject that immediately. Pride would have, once. Pride had cost me a lot already. Thank you, I said instead. Maria squeezed my shoulder lightly and walked away toward the kitchen, leaving me alone with the sound of plates clattering and the distant hush of expensive people finishing expensive meals. I returned to the floor on autopilot. Refilled water, cleared dishes, balanced molten chocolate cake and tiramisu on my tray like my hands were steady and my heart was not trying to outrun my ribs. Every few minutes I felt my phone buzz in my apron pocket. I did not look. I could not. Looking would make it real again. Looking would crack whatever thin layer of control I had managed to pull over myself. Damien's table lingered longer than the others, not in the sloppy way rich men sometimes did when they wanted to be noticed, but with deliberate patience. His guests spoke in low voices about investments, shipping routes, and a fundraiser next month, but Damien said very little. He listened. He watched. Once, when I passed with a tray of coffee cups, I made the mistake of glancing toward him. His eyes met mine immediately, and it felt less like being seen than being read. He knew something had changed. I could tell by the stillness in his face. Not curiosity. Assessment. The dessert rush finally eased around 11:30. Marco waved me over near the service station and avoided looking directly at me, which usually meant he was about to pretend concern while mostly thinking about staffing. You can clock out early, he said. Maria will cover close. And Chloe. He hesitated, tugging at his tie. If that guy comes back, tell me before he gets through the front door. I almost laughed at the uselessness of that plan. Tell me, as if warning Marco would stop anything. As if managers and reservation books and polished marble could hold back a man who had already decided my no did not count. I murmured thanks, untied my apron, and reached for my coat from the employee hook by the kitchen. My phone buzzed again. This time I looked before I could stop myself. One new message. I am outside. My breath caught so sharply it hurt. I lifted my head toward the front windows, rain streaking the glass into dark reflections and city lights. Belarus's entrance stood 30 feet away. Beyond it, the sidewalk glistened black under the street lamps. And parked directly across from the restaurant, engine idling under the rain, was Tyler's car. For one irrational second, I considered waiting. Maybe he would get tired. Maybe he would leave. Maybe the rain hammering the sidewalk and the late hour and the fact that Bellarosa was still half full would keep him in the car long enough for me to think of something smart. But Tyler had never been defeated by weather or dignity or common sense. He sat behind the wheel with the wipers cutting slow arcs across the windshield, his headlights washing pale over the slick black street. And even from 30 feet away, I could feel him there like pressure. Like a storm system parked directly outside the only exit I had. I tightened my grip on my coat. My phone was still in my hand, the message glowing up at me like a dare. I am outside. 3 simple words. Not a threat anyone could take to court. Not enough for the police. More than enough for me. Do not go out there. Damien's voice came from just behind my shoulder, quiet enough that nobody else would have noticed, but I felt it all the way down my spine. I turned too quickly. He had crossed the room without my hearing him, which should have been impossible on a restaurant floor of marble and glass and waiters carrying trays. Up close, he smelled faintly of cedar and rain and whatever expensive thing men like him wore, because they never had to settle for department store cologne. His expression was the same as always. Controlled. But there was a hardness in it now that had not been there before. I swallowed. He is waiting for me. Damien's gaze shifted to the front windows. To the car. To the figure behind the wheel. He did not look surprised. That unsettled me almost as much as Tyler's message had. I know, he said. How? He looked back at me. Because men like him do not leave when they are told no. They linger. They circle. They convince themselves patience is proof of love. The accuracy of it hit me so hard I could not speak for a second. Around us, staff moved through the last lazy minutes of closing. A busser stacked glassware. Someone in the kitchen laughed at something I could not hear. The front doors opened briefly for a couple in designer coats, letting in a ribbon of cold, wet air before shutting again. Ordinary sounds. Ordinary movement. My life had never looked more normal from the outside. I can take a cab, I said, and the lie sounded weak even to me. Damien's eyes rested on my face for a moment too long. No, just that. No explanation. No softening. The word should have irritated me. Instead, it steadied something panicked in my chest. I do not need a stranger, he asked. His tone stayed even, but there was something almost sharp under it now. Protection? A witness. He stepped slightly closer, lowering his voice. Choose whichever version offends you least, Chloe. You are still not walking out there alone. I hated how quickly relief moved through me. Relief felt too much like surrender. Too much like admitting I had reached the end of what I could handle by myself. You do not even know me, I whispered. Damien's gaze held mine, without wavering. I know enough. There were 100 reasons I should have said no. 100 warnings women are raised on, and survival teaches harder. Do not trust powerful men. Do not accept rides. Do not exchange one danger for another just because the second one wears a better suit. Every one of those reasons was valid. Every one of them was still true. But across the street, Tyler's car idled under the rain, patient as poison. And beside me stood a man who had watched me all night, not with hunger, not with pity, but with a kind of attention that felt terrifyingly close to certainty. Damien glanced toward the host's stand and lifted 2 fingers. One of the men from his table appeared almost immediately, as if he had been waiting for the signal all along. Tall, broad-shouldered, dark overcoat, the kind of face that did not invite conversation. Bring the car around, Damien said. The man nodded once and left through a side exit without a word. I stared after him. You were expecting this? I was preparing for possibilities. He said it like weather. Like this was what people with power did when they entered a room. Map every door, every risk, every weakness. I did not know whether to feel safer or more frightened. Probably both. My phone buzzed again. I flinched before I could stop myself. Damien noticed. Of course he noticed. Show me. The request was quiet. Not demanding. Somehow that made it harder to refuse. I unlocked the screen and held it out. His eyes moved over the messages once. Only once. Then he handed the phone back to me, so carefully our fingers almost did not touch. You are not going home tonight, he said. I opened my mouth to protest, but the front doors reflected a sudden wash of headlights across the polished floor. A long black SUV pulled up to the curb like a final answer, and across the street, Tyler's driver's side door began to open. Everything happened too fast, and somehow in slow motion at the same time. Tyler's door opened across the street, one hard slice of movement through the rain, while Damien's SUV glided to the curb in front of Bellarosa with the kind of precision that suggested the driver had done this 100 times before. The city lights flashed along the black paint. The passenger door nearest the sidewalk opened from the inside before the vehicle had fully settled. Damien did not grab me. He did not rush me. He simply placed one hand lightly at the middle of my back and said, "Walk with me." His voice was calm enough to borrow. I did. The front doors swung open, releasing us into a gust of wet December air that smelled like pavement, traffic, and rain-soaked concrete. My flat slipped for half a second on the slick sidewalk before I caught myself. Across the street, Tyler had stepped out of his car and was already rounding the hood, his face lit ghost pale under the street lamp. He looked furious now. Not loud, not reckless. Furious in that contained way that had always frightened me more because it meant he was choosing every word. "Chloe," he called over the rain, like we were just two people in an argument and not a woman trying to get away from the man who refused to let her. "Do not do this." Damien kept moving. So did I. One of his men stood by the open SUV door, umbrella angled against the rain, his expression blank and unreadable. Another man I had not even noticed took position closer to the curb, not blocking Tyler exactly, but changing the shape of the sidewalk enough that Tyler slowed. That was the thing about power, I realized then. Real power rarely needed to shove. It rearranged the room until everyone else understood where the lines were. "Chloe." Tyler's voice sharpened. I flinched before I could stop myself. Damien felt it. I knew he did because his hand at my back grew firmer by a fraction, not possessive, not pushing, just there. An anchor. "Get in," he said quietly. I should have argued. I should have demanded to know where he was taking me, why his men moved like a private security detail, what exactly happened to people who crossed him. Instead, I slid into the leather seat because the inside of that SUV looked dry and enclosed and impossibly far from Tyler's voice. Damien followed a second later, rain speckling the shoulders of his dark coat, and the door shut with a thick, final sound that seemed to cut the city in half. For the first time all night, I could not hear Tyler clearly. I only saw him through the tinted glass, one hand raised in frustration as the men on the sidewalk stayed between him and the vehicle without a single wasted motion. The driver pulled away from the curb smoothly, merging into traffic while Tyler and Bellarosa and the bright gold windows of the restaurant slid backward into the rain. I stared through the glass until the block disappeared. Only then did I realize I was shaking. Not dramatic trembling. The small, relentless kind that starts deep in the muscles and works outward until even breathing feels uneven. Damien reached into the built-in compartment opposite him and handed me a folded white hand towel, warm from somewhere, faintly scented with clean linen. "You are cold," he said. I wrapped it around my fingers because they had gone numb and because accepting something small felt easier than accepting. The scale of what was happening. "Where are we going?" My voice sounded thinner than I wanted. Damien loosened one cuff, glancing briefly toward the rain-blurred street ahead. "Somewhere he cannot reach you tonight." That is not an answer. His eyes came back to me then, dark and level and impossible to read all the way through. "No," he said. "It is the only answer that matters right now. Under other circumstances, that would have made me angry. Maybe it still did, a little. But anger needed energy, and fear had taken most of mine." The city streamed by outside in long ribbons of red taillights and wet reflections. Downtown thinned into quieter streets lined with limestone facades, darkened storefronts, and old buildings with guarded entrances. Inside the SUV, everything felt unnaturally silent. Not awkward. Controlled. The kind of silence expensive places and dangerous men seemed to generate without trying. I looked down at my phone, still clutched in my lap. 3 unread messages had appeared while we were pulling away. I did not need to open them to know who they were from. Damien noticed my gaze. "Turn it off," he said. "For tonight." I hesitated. My whole life was in that phone. My shifts. My landlord. Maria. My bank account with its embarrassing balance. All the tiny practical things poor women cannot afford to lose. Damien watched the hesitation move across my face and said, softer this time, "You can have a new one in an hour. Peace is harder to replace." I do not know why that was the sentence that nearly undid me. Maybe because nobody had said peace to me like it was a real thing in a very long time. My thumb hovered over the power button. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Damien did not answer right away. He looked out the rain-streaked window, jaw set, as if the question had touched something older than tonight. Then he said, "Because I have seen what happens when a woman asks for help one moment too late." His answer stayed with me the rest of the drive, settling somewhere under my ribs where fear had already made itself at home. I turned off my phone. The screen went black in my hand, and with it the last visible line connecting me to the version of my life I had been trying so hard to keep stitched together. The city outside kept moving anyway. Rain chased itself across the windows in silver lines. Brake lights smeared into red ribbons on the slick streets. We passed storefronts I recognized, then blocks I did not, then a part of Chicago that looked quieter, older, more expensive than anywhere I had ever lived. By the time the SUV slowed in front of a wrought iron gate set into a limestone wall, my pulse had settled just enough for exhaustion to take over. The gate opened before we fully stopped. Not after a buzzer. Not after a guard checked. It simply opened, like the house beyond it already knew who was arriving. We rolled up a curved driveway lined with bare winter hedges and discreet landscape lights. The house was not the kind of place people called a mansion out loud, because that would have sounded gaudy, but it was easily the size of the entire apartment building where I rented my one-bedroom walk-up. Tall windows, stone columns, warm light glowing behind glass. The kind of home that looked permanent, untouchable. The kind of place built by families who expected the world to move around them. I stared at it through the rain-streaked window and felt my throat tighten. "This is your house?" I asked quietly. Damien glanced at the front steps as the SUV curved to a stop. One of them. That should not have shocked me, but it did. Of course men like him had more than one house. Men like him probably had backup plans for their backup plans. I had exactly $612 in my checking account, and a landlord who texted smiley faces before reminders that rent was due. The contrast hit hard enough to make me almost laugh. The front door opened before the driver could come around. A woman in her 50s stood beneath the entry light, straight-backed and elegant in a dark sweater and tailored slacks, silver threaded through her black hair. She did not look surprised to see me. She looked prepared. That unsettled me more than anything else tonight. Damien stepped out first, then turned and offered me his hand as if we had arrived from an ordinary dinner instead of fleeing a man who would not leave me alone. I hesitated for half a breath before taking it. His hand was warm, steady. Mine felt cold, even wrapped around the towel. The woman at the door gave me a brief, assessing look that somehow felt kinder than pity. "The guest room is ready," she said to Damien, then to me. "I am Elena." Her voice carried a faint accent I could not place exactly. Italian maybe, or something close to it. "Come inside before you freeze." Warmth hit me the moment I crossed the threshold. Not just heat from the vents. The kind of warmth that comes from thick rugs, polished wood, and lamps placed by people who never had to choose between beauty and the electric bill. The foyer opened into a sweeping staircase and a living room I only caught in pieces as I walked by. Creamstone fireplace, oil paintings, floor-to-ceiling shelves. Quiet. Everything was quiet in a way expensive places always are, like sound itself behaves better around money. My wet shoes left faint prints on the dark hardwood. I noticed immediately and stepped smaller, embarrassed. Elena noticed too. "Do not worry about the floor," she said gently. "It has survived worse than rain." Damien handed his coat to a man who had appeared from somewhere deeper in the house. Security, I assumed. Staff. In this place the line between the two seemed thin. He turned back to me then, attention moving once over my face, my coat, my left arm still tucked too carefully against my side. "You need ice," he said, "and someone should examine that wrist." "It is fine," I answered automatically. Damien's expression did not shift. Elena's did, but only slightly, the smallest softening around the eyes. "People who are fine do not hold their breath every time they move," she said. I went still. It is one thing to feel fragile. It is another to have strangers identify the exact shape of it within minutes. "I do not want a hospital," I said quickly. "No hospitals. Please." The word please slipped out before I could dress it in pride. Damien nodded once. "You will not go to a hospital tonight." Relief arrived so fast, it almost made me dizzy. He must have seen that too, because his voice lowered when he added, "There is a physician who comes here when needed. You can refuse if you choose, but you will have the choice while safe, warm, and behind locked gates." "Choice." Another word that nearly undid me. Elena stepped closer then, not touching me, just close enough to feel human in the giant polished foyer. I have tea upstairs, she said. Chamomile. Honey. Clean clothes if you need them. You can tell me no to all of it, but I suspect you are tired of surviving the hard way. I did not know whether it was the kindness in her voice or the sheer exhaustion of the night, but my eyes burned suddenly. I blinked hard and looked away before I embarrassed myself. Damien watched the whole exchange in silence, his face unreadable as ever. Then he said, "You are safe here, Chloe." Simple words. Too simple, maybe, but something inside me, something bruised and exhausted and still half ready to run, wanted desperately to believe them. I followed Elena toward the staircase, each step softer than the last on the runner rug, and at the top landing I looked back without meaning to. Damien had not moved. He stood in the foyer with one hand loosened at his cuff, staring at the closed front door like he expected trouble to knock anyway. Then he pulled a second phone from his jacket pocket, pressed it to his ear, and said in a voice colder than anything I had heard from him all night, "Find out who gave him her address." The guest room looked like something from a hotel suite designed for people who had never had to count dollars before buying groceries. Cream walls, soft lighting, a bed large enough to sleep 4 people comfortably, a window seat overlooking the rain-dark garden. Even the air smelled expensive, faintly of cedar and clean linen instead of old radiator heat and whatever someone down the hall had burned for dinner. Elena led me inside, set a folded set of clothes at the end of the bed, and moved with the kind of quiet efficiency that made me think she had done this before. Maybe not for me. Maybe not for women dragged in from rainy nights and bad decisions. But for emergencies. For whatever counted as ordinary in Damien Moretti's world. "The bathroom is through there," she said, nodding toward a white door trimmed in dark wood. "There are towels in the cabinet. I brought a sweatshirt, soft pants, and slippers. The physician is on his way. He is discreet." I looked down at the clothes, then back. At her. I do not want to make trouble. Elena's mouth softened in a way that was not quite a smile. "Child, trouble arrived before you did." The word child should have offended me. I was 24, I worked double shifts, I paid my own rent, and I had learned how to survive a lot of things without anyone calling me something gentle. Instead, it made my throat ache. Elena crossed to a small table by the window and poured steaming tea from a silver pot into a porcelain cup. Chamomile, just like she promised. Honey already stirred in. "Drink this while it is warm," she said. Shock likes to pretend it is dignity. I let out a breath that might have been a laugh if I had any energy left. "You say that like you know." She looked at me then, really looked, with the kind of steady gaze older women carry when they have already buried enough illusions to stop being sentimental about pain. "I know enough." Then she left, closing the door behind her with a softness that felt almost ceremonial. I stood there for a full minute without moving, just listening. The room was too quiet. Not empty quiet. Protected quiet. The kind that made every small sound feel louder inside my own body. The rustle of my coat as I took it off. The tiny catch in my breath when I tried to flex my left hand. The porcelain click of the teacup against the saucer as I picked it up. My hands were still unsteady, but the heat helped. So did the honey. So did the fact that for the first time in weeks, maybe months, no one was texting me. No one was pacing outside a door. No one was demanding I explain myself for wanting peace. I changed in the bathroom because the dry clothes were impossible to resist. The sweatshirt was cream-colored and far too large, probably one of those expensive basics rich people bought in multiples. The soft pants brushed my ankles. The slippers were lined with fleece. I caught sight of myself in the mirror while washing off my makeup and barely recognized the woman staring back. Pale face. Smudged mascara. Hair coming loose in exhausted curls around my temples. A bruise near my wrist dark beneath the bathroom light despite all the makeup I had layered over it earlier. I touched it with 2 fingertips and felt something close to grief. Not for the bruise itself. For the months behind it. For the girl who had kept saying maybe this is the last time. When I stepped back into the bedroom, the tea had gone half cold, and there was a soft knock at the door. A gray-haired man in his 60s entered carrying a leather medical bag. Elena behind him with the calm expression of someone who did not believe in drama when practical care would do. "This is Dr. Hale," she said. "He is a family physician and an old friend." Old friend. In Damien's universe, that could have meant anything. Dr. Hale gave me a nod that managed to feel both professional and kind. Miss Bennet, he said, I will keep this simple. I would like to look at your wrist and make sure nothing is fractured. If you want me to stop at any point, you say so. Choice again. The words seemed to follow me through this house like a prayer I had forgotten how to say. Okay, I whispered. He was gentle, efficient, and did not ask questions that were not medical. Tenderness along the wrist. Swelling, yes. Limited motion, yes. He wrapped it carefully after checking the range, as much as I could manage. I do not believe it is broken, he said at last. But it is strained badly enough that I want imaging tomorrow if the pain worsens. Ice tonight. Rest. And no lifting trays for at least a few days. I almost laughed at that, because the rent due in 4 days did not care what Dr. Hale recommended. Elena must have seen the panic flicker through my face, because she said, sleep first. We can solve money tomorrow. Solve money tomorrow. In my world, nobody said things like that unless they were lying or selling something. Before I could answer, there was another knock. The door opened, and Damien stepped in, sleeves rolled back now, tie gone, the edges of the night finally visible in the tension around his eyes. His gaze went first to the bandage on my wrist, then to my face, and something dark and unreadable moved through his expression. How bad? He asked the doctor. Painful, Dr. Hale said. Not catastrophic. Damien gave one short nod, but his attention stayed on me. Good, he said quietly. It should have sounded cold. Instead it sounded like relief wearing armor. Dr. Hale and Elena left a few minutes later, taking the room's fragile normalcy with them. The door clicked shut, and suddenly it was just me and Damien and the low sound of rain touching the windows. He stayed near the door at first, one hand resting against the frame as if he was giving me room to decide whether I wanted him there. That should have made him seem less dangerous. It did not. It only made him seem more controlled, which in some ways was worse. Men who lacked control were storms. Men like Damien were architecture. They decided where everything went and made it feel inevitable afterward. You should sleep, he said. His voice was quieter now, stripped of the cool edge he had used downstairs. You are exhausted. I sat on the edge of the bed, fingers curled around the bandaged wrist in my lap. You keep saying that like sleep fixes things. He looked at me for a moment, unreadable. It fixes your ability to survive the next thing. I almost smiled at that, which surprised me. It was not humor, exactly. More like honesty landing in the right place. You say very comforting things. One corner of his mouth moved, gone almost before I was sure I had seen it. Comfort has never been my best skill. No, I thought. Protection probably was. The realization came uninvited and stayed anyway. Damien stepped farther into the room then, slow enough not to feel like an intrusion, and set a small glass bowl of ice wrapped in a kitchen towel on the bedside table. He must have brought it himself. The detail unsettled me in a completely different way than his security team or his black SUV had. Powerful men delegate. They do not carry ice upstairs for women they barely know. Dr. Hale says 20 minutes on, 20 minutes off, he said. And before you argue, that was not a request. You assume I was going to argue? His gaze dropped briefly to the defiance in my face, and then back to my eyes. You have done little else since I met you. That should have stung. Instead, it made me feel strangely visible. Not judged. Counted. Like he had actually been listening when I spoke instead of just waiting for me to stop. He crossed to the armchair near the window and sat, not close enough to crowd me, not far enough to feel absent. Rain silvered the glass behind him. Without his tie and suit jacket, with his sleeves rolled to the forearms and the first button of his dark shirt undone, he looked less like the untouchable man from Belarus and more like something more dangerous than that. Human. You should not be here, I said quietly. In my room, I mean. He tilted his head slightly. Would you prefer I leave? The simple fact that he asked undid something small in me. Tyler had never asked questions like that unless there was only one acceptable answer. Choice again. It kept appearing around Damien like a language I had forgotten how to trust. I do not know, I admitted. He nodded once, as if uncertainty were a valid answer instead of an inconvenience. Then I will stay until you know. Silence settled between us, but it was not the brittle kind I was used to. Nobody was waiting for me to explain myself. Nobody was looking for the exact phrase to twist later. I reached for the ice with my good hand and hissed softly when the cold touched the swollen wrist. Damien's eyes flicked to the movement immediately. Tomorrow your manager will receive a call. You will not be working for a few days. Panic hit so fast it drowned everything else. No, I looked up at him sharply. You cannot do that. I can. That is exactly the problem. I stood too quickly, pain biting through my arm and dizziness washing in behind it. You do not get to just decide things for me because you have money and men and a house with gates. I appreciate what you did tonight, I do, but my job is not optional. Rent is not optional. My life does not become a project because you decided to step in. The room went very still. Damien rose from the chair in one fluid movement, but he did not come closer. I am aware your life is not a project. His voice stayed low, though something darker had entered it now, which is why I am trying to keep you alive long enough to return to it. I stared at him, breath uneven, pulse stumbling. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened me. But the truth in that sentence landed hard enough to strip every easy defense away. For a second, neither of us moved. Rain threaded down the window behind him. Somewhere far below, a gate opened and shut again. Damien's jaw tightened slightly, as if he had just realized he had said more than he intended. Then he reached into his pocket, pulled out my powered-off phone, and set it on the bedside table beside the ice. We traced the number he used, he said. And Chloe. My name sounded different in his mouth now. Heavier. More personal. Tyler did not get your address from Bellarosa. The words landed harder than they should have. Maybe because some part of me had still been clinging to the idea that Bellarosa was the leak. That work was the weak point. That I could quit, move apartments, change routines, and stitch together a new life with enough distance and silence. But if Tyler had not gotten my address from the restaurant, then the hole in my life was older. Closer. Personal. I stared at Damien across the soft gold light of the guest room and felt the floor inside me tilt. Then where? I asked, and my voice came out thinner than I wanted. Damien did not answer right away. He watched my face the way he always did when he seemed to be deciding how much truth I could survive at once. From someone connected to your old apartment application, he said at last. A leasing office employee sold tenant information 6 months ago. Names. Numbers. Addresses. We found the chain tonight. 6 months. My mind caught on the number like fabric on a nail. 6 months ago was right around when Tyler had started showing up too often by accident. Outside the grocery store I used on Tuesdays. Near the laundromat 3 blocks over. Parked down the street from my building with some easy excuse about being in the neighborhood. I had told myself I was imagining patterns because fear likes to build cities out of shadows. Only now those shadows had names. Records. Prices. He bought my address, I said quietly. Damien's expression did not change, but something in his eyes turned colder. Yes. I sat back down on the bed because suddenly I did not trust my legs. The mattress dipped under me. Soft and expensive and utterly disconnected from the hard, narrow life I had been living for so long. Bought my address. Bought access to my fear. Bought a map to every place I had ever tried to feel safe. I thought about the deadbolt on my apartment door. The thin walls. The hallway light that flickered every third night and management never fixed. I thought about all the evenings I had sat on my couch with the television on low, trying to convince myself I was overreacting to footsteps outside. I should have moved, I whispered. Shame arrived right on schedule, familiar and efficient. I knew something was wrong, and I stayed. Damien moved then, crossing the room with that same measured quiet he brought to everything, and stopped a few feet away. Not too close. Never too close unless I allowed it. No, he said. One word. Firm enough to cut straight through the spiral. I looked up at him. No, he repeated, lower this time. Do not do his work for him. I frowned, still breathing too fast. What does that mean? His gaze held mine with unsettling steadiness. It means men like Tyler survive by making women believe every harm done to them was a mistake they should have predicted. A door they should have locked. A street they should not have taken. A text they should not have answered. It keeps the guilt where they want it. He paused, jaw tightening briefly as if the words cost him something. He chose to hunt for ways into your life. That is his shame, not yours. I did not realize how badly I needed someone to say that until my eyes burned. Not with dramatic tears. Just heat. Pressure. The physical strain of carrying blame for too long and suddenly being offered somewhere to set it down. I looked away first. You talk like you have done this before. Silence met that. Not empty silence. Weighted silence. When I finally lifted my eyes back to him, his face had changed in some small, difficult-to-name way. The control was still there, but something older moved underneath it now. Memory, maybe. Regret. My mother stayed with my father longer than she should have, he said. His voice remained even, but the evenness looked deliberate now, like a hand wrapped around something sharp. Not because she was weak, because she thought she could manage him, protect us, control the damage. I went very still. He had never volunteered anything personal before. Even his kindness had felt structured, guarded, like a locked gate left barely ajar. Did she leave? I asked softly. Damien's gaze shifted to the rain-dark window for a second, then back to me. Too late. The room seemed to narrow around those two words. He did not elaborate, and I did not ask him to. I did not need details to understand the shape of what he meant. Something terrible had taught this man what he was. Or maybe what he refused to become. That is why you said what you did in the car, I said. About asking for help one moment too late. He gave one small nod. Yes. I should have been afraid of how much power he had. How quickly he had found things the police probably would have taken weeks to uncover. How his voice could go cold enough to make a room obey. I was afraid of those things. But layered under that fear now was something more dangerous. Trust, maybe. Not complete. Not blind. Just the first fragile edge of it. Damien glanced at my bandaged wrist, then back to my face. Tomorrow your locks will be changed. I opened my mouth to object, but he lifted a hand slightly. At my expense. With your permission. The apartment building security cameras will also be reviewed. And before you argue, I am telling you the options, not removing them. The distinction mattered more than he probably realized. I let out a slow breath. You really mean that? I do not say things I do not mean. I believed him. That was the frightening part. More than the gates. More than the men downstairs. More than the fact that he could pull private records out of the dark by midnight. I believed him because every terrible man I had known had hidden behind charm, and Damien had never once pretended to be harmless. A sudden knock broke the stillness. One of his men opened the door just enough to say, "Sir, the doorman at Miss Bennett's building called. There is someone waiting outside her apartment now." Damien's face turned to stone. Who? The man hesitated only a fraction. Not Tyler. A woman. The room changed the moment the word woman entered it. Not loudly. Nothing in Damien Moretti's world ever seemed to happen loudly unless someone wanted it to. But the air shifted all the same, tightening around my ribs, turning the soft guest room light colder than it had been a second earlier. Damien did not raise his voice. He did not even move right away. He just looked at the man in the doorway and said, "Who is she?" The guard glanced at me once, then back to Damien. The doorman recognized her from previous visits. Says she used to come by with Tyler. Blonde. Late 20s. Driving a gray Lexus. She asked whether Miss Bennett had come home yet. My stomach dropped so fast I had to brace my good hand against the bedspread. I knew exactly who that was before the man even finished speaking. "Alyssa," I said quietly. Damien's gaze turned to me at once. "Who is Alyssa?" I swallowed. My mouth had gone dry. Tyler's sister. Saying it out loud made the whole thing feel stranger somehow. More personal. I had met Alyssa 3 times in almost 2 years. She wore cashmere in October and called everybody sweetie in a tone that made it sound like an insult. The first time I met her, she hugged me too tightly and whispered in my ear, "He gets intense when he cares." At the time I thought she was warning me. Now I knew better. She had been training me to excuse him. Damien's face revealed nothing, but the stillness in it sharpened. Is she a threat? The answer should have been simple. Instead it sat in my chest like a knot. Not directly, I said, then hated how weak that sounded. She does not do anything herself. She just appears afterward and tells you Tyler is under pressure and does not mean things the way they look. She cleans up the story. Damien's expression darkened by a shade. An enabler. Yes. The word left my mouth before I had time to soften it. I looked down at the blanket pooled around my borrowed clothes, at the ice sweating onto the towel by my knee, at my bandaged wrist that suddenly seemed like evidence in a trial I had been losing for months. She came by after he punched a hole in my kitchen wall in August, I said, the memory returning in ugly little pieces. She brought muffins and said he was ashamed. She made me feel guilty for being scared in my own apartment. The guard remained at the door, silent and watchful, but I could feel him cataloging every detail. Damien's world ran on information. Names. Patterns. Leverage. I should have been frightened by that. Instead, tonight, it felt strangely like being believed. Damien finally moved, crossing to the window and looking out into the rain-dark garden for one brief moment before turning back. "Tell the doorman to keep her there if she is still outside," he said to the guard. "No confrontation. No police yet. I want her spoken to politely and recorded clearly. If she leaves, follow at a distance." "Yes, sir." The man disappeared, shutting the door behind him. I stared at Damien. "You can do that?" He looked at me with that calm, unnerving directness that made lies feel childish. "Yes." "Why would the doorman even listen to you?" "Because I own your building." For a second I thought I had heard him wrong. "You what?" He did not look smug. Did not look amused. If anything, he looked irritated that this part had become relevant. "Not personally," he said. "Through a holding company. The property was acquired last year." My head felt too full and too empty at the same time. "You own my apartment building." "One of several," he said, as if that made the sentence less unbelievable. "I did not know you lived there until tonight." I searched his face for the shape of a joke and found none. "So, Bella Rosa, my apartment, the doctor, the locks, the doorman. Is there any part of Chicago you do not quietly control?" A strange expression crossed his face then, gone almost as soon as it appeared. Something close to weariness. More than I would like. It should have sounded arrogant. Instead it sounded tired. I laughed once under my breath, because the alternative was crying again, and I was getting tired of that too. "This is insane." "Yes," Damien said, and for the first time all night there was the faintest edge of dry humor in his voice. "But not for the reason you think." I looked at him, really looked, and saw something I had missed under all the precision and danger and impossible competence. Not softness. He was not soft. But there was restraint. Deliberate restraint. The kind that belongs to a man who could make the world move and had chosen, for reasons of his own, not to break everything just because he could. "Why did you never tell me?" I asked before I could stop myself. "That you owned the building." His gaze held mine. "Because until tonight, you had not asked me for help." The sentence settled between us with a weight that felt larger than the words themselves. I thought about the call from my kitchen floor. "Can you come get me?" I had not asked him to save me. I had not even known if he would answer. But he had come anyway, and now every path around me seemed to lead back to one unsettling truth. He had not trapped me here. He had built a space where I could choose what happened next. That was somehow more dangerous than force. "What happens now?" I asked softly. Rain threaded against the windows. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. The whole house seemed to be listening. Damien stepped closer then, not enough to crowd me, just enough that his voice no longer had to travel far. "Now," he said, "you sleep." I almost smiled despite everything. That is not an answer either. It is for tonight. His eyes dropped briefly to my bandaged wrist, then rose back to my face with a steadiness that made my pulse shift for reasons fear alone could not explain. "Tomorrow, if you want to press charges, I will make sure you are protected. If you want to move, I will see it done. If you want every door between you and him reinforced, I will pay for steel." He paused, and when he spoke again his voice was quieter than before, stripped down to something that sounded almost like truth before armor reached it. "But whatever happens next, Chloe, no one is going to decide your life for you again." I should have looked away. Instead I stayed exactly where I was, caught by the gravity of a man who frightened me and steadied me in equal measure. Downstairs, a phone began to ring. Damien's jaw tightened. He did not turn toward the sound. He just kept his eyes on mine as if the whole rest of the house could wait one more second. Then, very softly, he said, "And if Alyssa came looking for you tonight, it means Tyler is afraid of something. The question is not what he wants from you anymore. The question is what he is so desperate to keep you from finding out."